Hi, Sally Walker here, your hormone and slow age expert, and welcome to Carbohydrate Week. So today we are going to talk about the foods which everybody thinks are carbohydrate, or everybody considers to be carbohydrates. The sugars I've been talking about, the fructose, the glucose, etc., everybody considers those to be sugars, which they are. We call them sugars. But remember, any carbohydrate is basically a sugar, but we just seem to make this we differentiate, and it's getting us all confused because at the end of the day, any carbohydrate is going to end up as glucose, which is a sugar. Okay, so let's look at these polysaccharides, which are many glucose molecules all bonded together, and they are pure glucose with the other sugars, the fructose and the galactose, and don't get in here at all. It's just glucose, okay? And they're all bonded together, and they are covered by fiber in their natural state, and as long as the fiber's there, then we can't get to the glucose because we don't digest fiber anymore. Okay, so we would call them complex. I don't really understand why they're called complex, because as I said, they're just lots of glucose molecules put together, covered by fiber. So complex, I mean, it's difficult for us to digest. We can't basically digest fiber, so we can't get at the glucose. But the word complex, again, is one of these words I'm thinking, ooh, it's keeping us all confused anyway. So it's long chains of glucose molecules. There will be more than 10, because otherwise they will be called oligosaccharides, that we've also talked about. Okay, there are 3 categories of polysaccharides, or this group, and it's starches, it's glycogen, and it's cellulose, or we also can call that for fiber. Okay, so let's have a look at these starches. See, everybody knows the word starch, don't they? So starch is just long chains of glucose covered by fiber, maybe, okay? And starch is the way that plants store their glucose. So remember, they make glucose through the process called photosynthesis, and they store it in chains called polysaccharides, or called starches. Yeah. So when we eat these plants, we will get the long chains. Yeah, that's how it works. Very easy, very simple. So which plants are we talking about? Well, we are talking about rice. We're talking about potatoes and other root vegetables. We're talking about other grains than the rice. The rice is a grain, but we're talking about the grains like the corn and that kind of thing. We're talking about seeds, we're talking about pulses, and we're obviously also talking about their products. So if you're making a flour from your grain, then it's processed, and many of those grains, or much of that flour, will actually be without fiber. So now the glucose is readily available, isn't it? Yes. So think a little bit about that. You'll be eating pure glucose. You see, this is what we need to know. We are basically, if we're eating a very refined flour made into a bread or into a pasta, then we're really eating pure glucose. Yes. Oh dear. Anyway, so any processing is going to disturb this fiber. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, because if we don't get rid of the fiber, we can't get to the nutrients, because there's obviously other nutrients in there. There's some protein in there. There'll be some vitamins in there. There'll be some minerals in there, etc. So we'd like to get to some of the goodies inside the grains and the seeds, but we just don't want to get too much of the glucose. Okay, right. So let's look at glycogen. So what is glycogen? So glycogen is the way we humans store our glucose. Plants store it as starch, and we store it as glycogen. Same, long chains of glucose molecules. Now, there's only 2 places in the body where this can happen. One of them is the liver, and the other is in your muscles. So in the liver, this can be converted back again to glucose if you need it, if your blood sugar is a little bit low, and your liver is doing this all day long. And the other, in your muscles, can only be used for muscle energy production. So you're not going to get more out of that. Once it's in the muscles, they're made to glycogen, it will be solely for, or purely for, muscle energy production. Yeah, so that basically is your glycogen. So the last category is cellulose or fibre or roughage. That's what we used to call it in the old days, didn't we? Roughage. Anybody remember that word? Fibre, okay. And this is defined as the components of the plant which cannot be digested by our, as a humans, digestive enzymes. Okay, so it's the stuff which is left, which we can't digest, basically, the fibre. Yeah, okay. Now we are unable to break down the fibre because we don't have the enzyme, and the enzyme's called cellulase. But other animals do actually, and they can break down the fibre in some of these polysaccharides or in some of these plant foods. They can break it down and they can then get to the glucose and use it to make energy, like cows eating grass, for example. Yeah, very good. So that's your three categories. We've got the starches, which we all know and which we all consider to be carbohydrates, coming from your grains and your rice and your potatoes and your root vegetables and all these things. And as long as the fibre is intact, then we can't get to the goodies. So when the fibre is processed or removed in some way or form, then we can get to the glucose. We have the glycogen, which is the way we store our glucose. Remember, starch is the way the plants store their glucose. And then we've got the fibre. So the fibre we can't digest, we can't break it down, but other animals can, so they get to the glucose there. That's it. That's polysaccharides. So now you know all about the different categories of carbohydrates. Happy hormones, happy life.